So again, we're going to start with this, the front and the back yokes. We're going to sew the shoulder seam in a 1/2 inch, and then we'll press these over. These are two different binding treatments for the neckline. I'm going to press these seams open, but in the process, taking the liberty of my bias pieces that have already been cut, and I press them in half. Both of them. So that's something I do not have to do. So I'm going to go and press these. Okay, now that I've pressed my shoulder seams open, I'm going to attach the binding to one of the necklines. I'm going to take the smaller of the two bias pieces, and I'm going to sew it 1/4 of an inch around the neck. Once again, making sure that you have a true bias will help how this bias actually becomes finished off, because without a true bias, you could have problems. So make sure that that bias is accurate. Now, truthfully, some of these patterns are a little bit off. So bias was too long, but that is important that the bias was too long. The last thing you want to do is have a bias that's too short, and while you're in the process of developing this. So now we're going to do this as the facing bias, facing. At this point, it's probably not a bad idea to press this as well. Okay, what I did was I pressed all of the seam allowance going towards the bias, because we're going to work from the inside of the garment. No, this one we're going to work on the outside. We're going to turn this down. We're gonna do half one way, half the other way. So this first half, we're going to do an edge stitch. Would have alleviated the necessity to press it, but we're going to do two different finishes on this. This looks like about the center front. So I'm going to stop there. So that's one way to finish. Technically, you're just going to do it this way. Now the other side, we're going to edge stitch like a top stitch. So that you see this stitch. The other one is invisible. It's good that I pressed this. This is going to work out much better. Bias is great to work with because it gives, you can manipulate it in any way that you need it to perform the function that you want it to, because it gives, it stretches, you can ease it easily enough. It is your friend, so working with bias is great when it's a true bias. Now, do you see the way that this is kind of rolling a little bit? All I need to do is press that and it's going to be flat. Oops, lost my thread. Anyway, by pressing it, now you can see how nice and flat it is. So the half of the neckline was done on the edge of the bias. The other half, we did it on the edge of the neckline. I made a top stitch on the neckline. Press it, and this one is done. Now the other one is French piping. Now, on this one, we're going to do two different edges. We're going to let one of the edges be raw. The other one we're going to finish. So let's start with the finished edge first. First, we have to put this on. So let's fold this back. Let's start with the finished edge. Fold this back 1/2 inch. We're going to fold this same. Actually, it's probably easier if we start sewing it. Extend it past that, but we need to go on the other side. So I have it folded and then I have it extended on the bias piece. Past, see how I have it past the edge of the yoke. I'm going to start 1/4 inch all the way around. When we get to the other side, we're not going to finish it like we just did to this side. We're just going to have a raw edge. Just to give you two different ways. And this finished edge, we're going to stitch it in half, put it in half, and stitch it back 1/2 inch. What we want to do is this edge, we want it to go past that stitching. Oops. Lost. Isn't far enough over so I did it on the wrong side, so it didn't seem obvious. My seam lines need to be a bit bigger. Now, all of your seam allowance needs to go again towards the bias. If you choose to press it, that's fine. Actually, right now, I'm just going to throw a few pins in this, which will do the job equally as well. You know me, I like pressing things. Then I don't have to think. It's okay. You want that bias to turn down and cover your stitch. Then when you sew in the ditch, you know that you'll catch this bias on the inside and the French piping will be complete. It also gives you an accurate finish and consistent finish to this piping. That is what it's supposed to look like when it's complete. So double check when you pin it or if you press it, that it is consistent in width on the right side of the garment. So if you start with all kinds of sizes, wide and narrow, it's not really a good finish. The way I have it pinned, let's look. The way I have it pinned, it's pretty consistent. And you see that? All of this. We're going to stitch it in the ditch, and then we know that we pinned it in such a way that we're covering the stitching and that stitching it in the ditch is going to catch the bias on the inside. It's probably not a bad idea to press this because this is a little more tedious, but I think this is a good way to show you. You can't see what I'm doing on the ironing board. And like in the grand scheme of all of this, the consistency that you're going to have on the right side of the garment, you're also going to have on the inside of the garment. And that's always a plus. Like I said, some of these patterns are not working out to be exactly what they should be, so do not stress over that. This is I'm just gonna cut that. Yeah. Okay. The more pins you have, the more accurate it will turn out. So now I'm going to start. I'm going to have my seam allowance up into the bias. This is going to be the tricky part right here. Ooh, is everybody okay? Yeah. Okay, so we'll stitch it in the ditch. A little thick, so sometimes it doesn't, the machine doesn't advance. Yes. Yeah, I also like to take my pins out as I get to them because I don't really want to stitch over the pin. Now, unfortunately, I'm using red thread, so it's not going to be as invisible as it would be if you were using self-colored thread, but that's just so that you can see what I'm doing, basically. I'm stitching it right in the ditch. Oh, I went over a pin. I lucked out. Now, as you can see, the bias is consistent in size here, and it looks good on the underneath side as well. Go slowly. Keep this as flat as you can because you just don't want it. Don't want to see any little pleats or tucks in your bodice. I'm just going to take all the pins out. So that's your French piping. Now I had a little trouble with the machine on this end, so it doesn't look as good as it should. But once I press this, this will lay flat. And there's your French piping. Now, do you see how nice and flat this is just by pressing it? This is what I say. Bias is great to work with just because it expands when you need it to, it tightens things up when you need it to, and it's always, after pressing, flat. So those are the two samples that we're going to work on today. If you have any questions, let me know. There's two different sizes of bias. One is 1.5 inches. There, it says it on the pattern. Let me stop this. So let me stop this recording. Okay.